Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to wait at least another couple of minutes to allow more people to join. For those who are already online, I'll mention that we've had an incredible response from the community. We've had almost 200 people registered for today's program. I'm watching the tally and people are continuing to log in, so let's give it another 60 seconds. All right, let's get started. Well, good afternoon and welcome to today's program on extremism in America, which sadly has become a timely topic. Our speaker today is Chris McGarrix, who is a research fellow with the Anti-Defamation League's Center on Extremism. I'm Michael Rothstein. I'm a former president of the Federal Bar Association Chicago Chapter, and I'm also a longtime lay leader of the Anti-Defamation League, who is the organization in which our speaker today is affiliated. I'd like to thank the Appellate Lawyers Association and the Chicago Bar Association for co-sponsoring today's program. And I'm sure that co-sponsorship is in part responsible for the wonderful registration response that we received. Before we get into the substance of today's program, I have a few housekeeping matters. For those lawyers online who practice in federal court and are not members of the Federal Bar Association, I invite you to consider joining. Our members and leadership include private and government lawyers and judges from the Northern District of Illinois' District Court, Bankruptcy Court, and Administrative Tribunals. We offer programs throughout the year on topics of interest to federal practitioners, as well as general interest topics such as the one you're about to hear today. You can mark your calendars for a few upcoming FBA events. If you are an FBA member, we have a members only event. It's our annual holiday party and toy drive for the Ark at St. Sabina. And that will be at the CBA on December 7th between 5 and 7. On February 2nd, we have a lunchtime webinar on the book, The Code of Silence, with its author, Liz Olson, which is discussing failures in the judicial misconduct complaint system. Other February programs, which we don't yet have precise dates, but we will soon, is our always anticipated annual employment law seminar and our program in honor of Black History Month. For Illinois attorneys attending today's program, we've been approved for 1 hour of CLE credit. The CLE form is, if you go on your screen on the upper right, you should see, what do they call it? The handout section, which will have the CLE form. and the code will be announced a couple of times during the program and also in the chat box. The materials for today's program include the PowerPoint deck that our speaker will be using, and that is also in the handout section on the upper right, as well as the bio for today's speaker. As I mentioned, our speaker today is with the Anti-Defamation League. If you're not familiar, the ADL is one of the country's oldest civil rights organizations, started right here in Chicago in 1913. Among its many activities, the ADL operates its Center on Extremism, which monitors extremist groups in America. Just as one accolade, the FBI has commended ADL and its Center on Extremism as the #1 non-governmental organization in America, which provides the agency with extremist-related intelligence. Our speaker today, Chris McGarrix, is a research fellow with ADL Center on Extremism. As a research fellow, he's responsible for the ongoing monitoring of various white supremacist organizations in sub-movements throughout the United States. He's assigned to conduct trainings and provide threat assessments and intelligence briefings on the tactics, strategies, and objectives of white supremacist organizations for federal, state, and local law enforcement. Since 2005, Chris has trained over 20,000 law enforcement officers at more than 300 briefings and trainings, specializing in white supremacist prison gangs, racist skinheads, traditional white supremacists, and the white power music scene throughout the US. And yes, that is a thing. He has also conducted trainings at international conferences in Canada and Europe. He serves as an expert consultant to law enforcement agencies on cases involving various types of white supremacists, with an expertise on the interpretation and analysis of tattoos and numeric codes and symbols. And he has assisted law enforcement on several white supremacist related investigations, as well as provided expert witness testimony in multiple extremist related hate crime trials. If you have questions during the program, please submit them in the chat, and then we're going to make sure that Chris finishes up a few minutes early, and we will take on as many questions as we can. And with that, I give you Chris McGarrix from the Anti-Defamation League's Center on Extremism.
All right, thank you very much, Michael. I have this distinct pleasure of probably ruining many people's lunches this afternoon with a less than pleasant topic, but give me a second here because I'd like to share my screen. So, all right, how's it look on your end, Michael?
Looks good.
Okay, excellent, thank you very much. Okay. So good afternoon, everybody. I really want to say thank you for this opportunity to briefly speak to you about what we see as the current landscape of extremism, both broadly in the United States, but then I'd also like to localize it to Illinois to show you the kind of things that we're seeing in the Center on Extremism. As Michael said, I'm a research fellow in the Center on Extremism. I've been doing this with the ADL for more than 17 years, but being an expert in white supremacy in this field in general for nearly 25 years. In addition to the work that I've done with the ADL. Unfortunately, with the current political and social climate in this country over the last several years, I think the work of the ADL Center on Extremism has never been more relevant, more important. But before we really jump into the substance that I want to talk to you about in greater detail, I want to briefly explain, though, what the Center on Extremism is for those of you that aren't familiar. There are plenty who maybe have only heard about it and don't know the kind of work that we do, or maybe don't even know what the ADL in general does. So with that said, the Center on Extremism basically is ADL's research and investigative arm. We serve as this kind of clearinghouse of real-time information about extremism and hate of all different types, with a staff of more than 2.5 dozen seasoned investigators and analysts and researchers, all with a variety of different types of subject matter expertises. And we track activity, extremist activity in the United States, but also abroad. We track it online and on the ground in the real world in an effort to try and monitor, expose, and disrupt any kind of the extremist threats that come across our screens, basically. We routinely work with law enforcement, whether it's investigative assistance, whether it's in providing expert witness testimonies, as you've heard, as well as provide tech companies with some critical data and our expertises in trying to help mitigate those threats that come across, say, their social networking platforms. In addition to that, we also work very closely with other constituents all throughout the country connected to any one of our 25 regional offices located throughout the United States. One of the things that we use that we like to talk about to show what we are seeing on our end when it comes to extremism is what's known as our heat map. It's an acronym that stands for hate, extremism, anti-Semitism, and terrorism. And we take 6 data sets, as you can see here on this screen, the 6 data sets that we have up here at the top include everything from anti-Semitic incidents to white supremacist propaganda, white supremacist events, extremist-related murders, terrorist plots and attacks, and extremist and police shootouts. We take those 6 data sets and we plot them throughout the United States as they occur, and you can actually adjust then everything from which kind of incidents do you want to see? What's the time range that you want to see? We have it going all the way back to 2009, all the way up until the present day. Well, the present year, it's updated, I believe, up until October of this year. And when you look at this map, you can see the larger the circles that are on the map, the larger number of incidences that we have monitored and tracked and added into this map itself. And you can see where the hotbeds of extremist types of activity take place. If you wanted to whittle it down even closer, you can look at Illinois. Illinois, when you look at it, combining the 2 years of 2021 and 2022 across the country, we're at nearly 13,000 extremist-related and anti-Semitic incidents in the United States. If you look at Illinois in that same time period, we're looking at 336, most of which were white supremacist propaganda, which I'm going to be talking about later on, 131 anti-Semitic incidents, and 4 white supremacist events that have taken place just in that 2-year time span. Now, just for reference's sake too, if you're interested with this heat map, it doesn't just look at the state itself. If you wanted to look at your local community, your town, and see if we're noticing anything that's been going on, you can actually type in the town and the state and then adjust any of the criteria of what you want to see. Do you want to see just how many anti-Semitic incidents happened in your local community? How many propaganda distributions happened? Those that we've been able to monitor and track and verify. And so that's one of the resources we like to let the community know about, but also law enforcement to let them know the things that we're seeing on our end as experts in extremism. So with that said, the Center on Extremism covers the broad spectrum of ideological extremism. Now, when I talk about right-wing, left-wing extremism, I'm not talking about Republicans versus Democrats. I'm talking about the far, far fringes of the extremist ideological spectrum. From the left wing, we're looking at everything from your animal rights extremists to your eco-extremists and your anarchists. We look at black separatists, so that could be Nation of Islam, the Black Hebrew Israelites, the New Black Panther Party, anti-Semitic incidences we track, Islamist extremists, and then your far, far right-wing extremists, which we're going to be talking about and what that encompasses, because it's not just white supremacy. There are several different sub-movements that fall within there. Now, that being said, what you're going to see is that a lot of what you're going to be hearing about is going to be right-wing extremism. And the fact of the matter is that that's where the bulk of extremist-related activity is currently taking place. And so that's the bulk of where we're going to spend our bandwidth in the Center on Extremism. It doesn't mean we're ignoring the other types of extremist activity. It's just that's where we need to dedicate as many people within the COE to be monitoring and tracking that kind of stuff. But we still do look at all the other types of extremism that's out there. So as we get right into this, then, what do I mean when I'm talking about right-wing extremism in the United States? Now, this is the most prevalent domestic extremism in this country currently. And under the overarching umbrella of right-wing extremism, this is going to include everything from white supremacy and all the different sub-movements that you're going to see, to your anti-government movements that are out there, to a whole variety of different types of what we call single-issue right-wing extremists. And within these movements are going to have varying degrees of compatibility and overlap. So you can actually see some cross-membership or cross-ideological beliefs. Some may be libertarian and others might be authoritarian in their nature. You're going to have some that are very religious, which is actually what drives some of their ideologies, but then others that are completely secular, some elitist, some populist. But what we see common as a theme within each of these sub-movements is going to be racism and anti-Semitism, xenophobia and nativism, which is a huge thing going on right now, the conspiratorial thinking that the government is not who they say they say are, and it obviously is going to create these conspiracy theories about what the government is really doing. Sinistrophobia, which is this intense hatred for the left, and then fear of general social change. Now, over the last 5 years or so, though, within the political and social environment being so divided in this country, we're so polarized that domestic extremists feel a sense of emboldenment. And we've seen this continue to rise, where they are openly able to espouse their extreme ideological beliefs and openly and publicly profess it, because in part they feel that there's a lot of other people that are out there that feel the same way that they do, and that they can share these beliefs openly, as opposed to, say, a decade ago, when right-wing extremists, white supremacists, anti-government extremists, whatever it might be, felt compelled to basically keep their ideology under the radar, not to express it unless they know the people they're talking to are going to be open to it. Unfortunately, they feel that this is their time. We've seen a shift in what's known as the Overton window. And this is where the parameters of what is considered normal in a society or acceptable in political and social discourse is now shifting. And unfortunately, it means that there's an expanding mainstream acceptance of what had been at one time extremist beliefs and ideologies. And it's being openly embraced by not only just the extremists themselves, but we see it by some politicians are talking about it. We have news pundits that are talking about it as well. And that's that whole shift then in that what we call the what's known as the Overton window. All right, so let's look at the evolution of right-wing extremism. American right-wing extremism has been around since basically as an organized ideology since the end of the Civil War, during the era of Reconstruction. And the first right-wing extremist movement in this country were white supremacists. When the Klan took off during the Reconstruction era in 1865 and has continued to this very day. And what you see in this diagram, though, is the evolution of, in the blue arrows, you see new types of white supremacist movements coming across, whether it's neo-Nazis, Christian identity, the racist skinheads, your alt-right. You then see the emergence in the 1920s of the anti-communist effort with the John Birch Society. And then you see then after that, a plethora of additional movements, primarily in the late 20th century, which includes your anti-government, tax protests, sovereign citizens, boogaloo and militia and the likes of those. And then at the top, you'll also notice, though, those red blocks, those 5 main red blocks, are indicative of periods of white supremacist surges in this country. And not surprising, it happens right at the end of the Civil War when the Reconstruction was going on. We saw it again during the Civil Rights Movement because white supremacists felt threatened by these things that were going on. Now, that's not to say that in that lynching period, the Jim Crow period that you see there, that there were not a lot of white supremacists. The reason there wasn't a surge per se is because they were basically maintaining what they felt was the status quo. There were plenty of lynchings, 4,000 plus, that happened during that period, but there wasn't a need to overturn the paradigm in this country of what was going on. It was only when the Civil Rights era came about in the 1980s and the late 1990s into the 2000s, and then the into the 2020s, where we saw these surges in white supremacy as marked up there in the red bars. So what do we mean? What constitutes a right-wing extremist? Like, what are those movements part of? Before I get into this, one thing I want to make very clear is that in any one of these categories that you see here, the majority of adherents are not what we would say are card-carrying members of a group, an actual organization. Majority of them are unaffiliated individuals that have that ideology. Maybe they associate with people that belong to a certain Klan group or a certain militia movement or anything like that, but the majority are not actual members. They're unaffiliated. Okay, so on the left-hand side, well, we're first talking about white supremacy. Basically, their belief system, they claim that the white race is rapidly heading towards this extinction due to a rising tide of color of non-white people coming in here. It's being manipulated and controlled by the Jews. And unless white people do something by whatever means necessary, the white race is going to eventually become extinct. And it's basically exemplified in this 14-word slogan that they all adhere to. But just because somebody's a white supremacist doesn't mean there aren't divisiveness between the different types of white supremacy. If you will, there are sub-movements. So we have traditional white supremacists. This is like your Klan. Neo-Nazis, which is pretty self-evident. Christian identity is basically a bastardized version of taking Christianity and saying the Bible was written for white people. There are Norse paganism, white supremacist Norse pagans, sometimes referred to as Odinists. You have racist skinheads, white supremacist prison gangs, and basically the newest member of the family, which came about around 2010, is your alt-right. These are all your white supremacists. But one thing to keep in mind is that something like the Proud Boys you can see there is an example of what's known as alt-light, not alt-right. And the reason I want to clarify this is because there had been a lot of media outlets that were conflating the Proud Boys as being white supremacists. They are extreme right wing, but they are not white supremacists. They have similar attributes to the alt-right, except for the fact that they don't believe in white supremacy, which is why members of the Proud Boys are Latino, African American, Asian, and so on. So they're not white supremacists. There are white supremacists in their ranks, of course, but they are not a white supremacist organization itself. In the anti-government movement, generally, these individuals share this basic notion that part or all of our current government has been subverted by or is collaborating with a conspiracy, and that's therefore our government is illegitimate. It's a de facto government. And this includes your tax protesters, your sovereign citizens, or individuals who believe that our government was subverted and the original government was turned into this illegitimate, tyrannical government. And they believe that you can divorce yourself from the illegitimate government. And once you do so, you have the government no longer has jurisdiction over you. This is where a lot of judges and prosecutors and law enforcement in particular are targeted by sovereign citizens because they don't believe that any of those people have authority over them because of the illegitimate government. The militia movement, pretty self-explanatory, though, large paramilitary movement like your 3%ers and your oath keepers. And they combine this hostility and opposition to our federal government with all these conspiracy theories with an intense focus on firearms. And more recently, we actually had the Boogaloo movement, which came about. And this is similar to the militia movement. They're easily identifiable, frequently wearing Hawaiian type shirts, but then completely decked out in paramilitary gear. Less conspiratorial than those in the militia, more purely anti-government and more specifically anti-police. And they do have this paramilitary or tactical emphasis. Some of the single issue right-wing extremist movements are actually part of more mainstream movements that branch off and kind of get their start within the mainstream movements and become more extreme. Take, for example, anti-abortion extremism. There are plenty of people who are against abortion and that are not extremists. It's when you go that next level where you're going to encourage firebombing Planned Parenthood and abortion facilities. You're going to suggest people go out and assassinate doctors that perform abortions and stuff like that. The anti-immigrant extremists, these are the ones that would go out down to the border and do their own border patrols, if you will. Not people who are just against illegal immigration, but take things into their own hands as such. The anti-vax movement, those that go that next level from the more mainstream people that are out there. Trumpist extremists is something that has recently been added into this whole group of right-wing extremists. Now, this is not to say that people that support Trump are extremists. In fact, he has plenty of supporters where only a small minority of them can be considered extreme. But these individuals are the ones that buy into the cult of personality that was basically cultivated by Trump himself, where they blindly believe in Trump-related conspiracy theories like the 2020 election was stolen, and are willing to put Trump above the democratic mores and traditions that we all accept. Underneath Trump, though, you also have the QAnon conspiracy theorists that are out there. And then the last one is your toxic masculinity and manosphere. And this consists of a bunch of misogynistic individuals, mix it with the 4chan subculture. And the most concerning part of this are what are known as incels, or involuntarily celibate individuals. Because of their inherent violence that goes with this extremist movement, where they have in fact murdered people because of their ideological beliefs. Incels, for those who don't know, are people who are unable to form meaningful romantic relationships with men that cannot do this. And they externalize their frustration into extreme hatred and contempt towards women. And sometimes that unfortunately evolves into violent encounters with women that they see are an affront to them. So that's what we see when we're talking about extremist movements, right-wing extremist movements in this country. What are some of the trends then that we're seeing? What are the things that are really kind of coming across our radar that are making us say, all right, we got to keep an eye on this. What are some of the most important things? And this is by no means a comprehensive list at all. First and foremost, we follow very closely extremist-related murders in this country because of the extremist nexus to it, but also because of the implications that it has on the broader community of frequently those that are targeted. Now, counting extremist-related murders is really only one way that we quantify extremism. It's not the only thing that we use. We try to use all different types of quantification, all types of data, and we put it all together in hopes that it'll give us a better sense of what the state of extremism is in this country. Now, looking at the numbers, what we do is The beginning of the calendar year, we look at the preceding year itself, look at and basically do an analysis of all the extremist-related murders that we were able to track over the course of that last calendar year. And so in 2021, we tracked 29 murders that were linked to some form of an extremist ideology by the perpetrator themselves. I want to stress something. This is a really small number of killings in the overall number of murders that occur in this country. And I'm not trying to make any claim. The ADL and Center on Extremism are not making any kind of a claim that extremist-related murders are the biggest violence-related problem in this country. However, it is important to remember that extremist-related murders often have a much larger, more traumatic effect, especially if they were committed for ideological reasons, than, say, other types of murders. When you think of some of the extremist-related murders and the effect that they have on the victims beyond the immediate family and friends and acquaintances, but to an entire community, take, for example, this past May, when Peyton Gendron went on the shooting spree in Buffalo, New York at the Tops Market, where he specifically targeted that area because of the African-American community, targeting his victims because of the African-American community. It did not affect just the 13 people that he shot and murdered 10 of those. It affected the wider Black community in that part of Buffalo. In El Paso, when Patrick Crusius went on the shooting spree down there in the Walmart in 2019, he targeted the Latino community. Had a much broader effect than just those initial victims. It had the entire Latino community. Same can be said for the Pittsburgh shooting in 2018, and we can keep going on and on and on. But what you notice is the trend that we've seen over the last several decades. Last year, you look at the ideology of those extremists themselves, and this includes both extreme or ideologically motivated and non-ideologically motivated murders. The majority were by right-wing extremists, 45% by white supremacists, 10 by anti-government extremists, 17% by the manosphere, and 17 by other right-wing extremists. When you look at those, though, of the three, there were only 3 that were not. They were 2 of them were committed by left-wing extremists, Black separatists, and 1 was by an Islamist extremist. In addition to looking at that preceding year, though, when we put out this report, we also do a 10-year retrospective to find out what are the trends that we see in the broader spectrum of time. And it follows this exact same trend. The majority of extremist-related murders are by right-wing extremists. And when you narrow it down within just that group itself, the majority are perpetrated by white supremacists. That is where the biggest threat comes from. Another thing that we've noticed, and this is becoming continuously problematic and increasingly problematic, is the weaponization of technology. Online tools have been weaponized by extremists of all different types, right-wing, left-wing, Islamist, and so on, to try and basically meet those 4 R's, the reach, the recruitment, and the radicalization. It is so easy to have a much broader reach on various social networking platforms that are out there without having individuals having to go to the real world. You can recruit people by posting misinformation and disinformation on these platforms, encouraging people to buy into your ideology, thus leading it into the radicalization taking place rather quickly. Now, tech companies, those that are more mainstream, whether it's your Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and places like that, have in some cases enforced terms of service and tried to deplatform people that are extremists with varying degrees of success and effectiveness. But what a lot of people don't realize is that just because somebody gets booted off Facebook or anywhere else that's out there does not mean that that person is no longer radicalized, that they no longer subscribe to an ideology. There are plenty of more obscure platforms, whether it's Gab or VK or Telegram and 4chan, Minds, all of these that are out there that they can easily migrate to. And these sites are already popular with the fringe groups, but increasingly their increased scrutiny and crackdown on many of these platforms really doesn't happen. And so this new home becomes a concentrated echo chamber of all their extremist ideologies. Now, the real problem comes in, especially when there are those individuals who become radicalized online, have no association in the real world with extremists person to person, and then move their activity, though, into the real world, sometimes having the deadly consequences, exactly like what we saw up in Buffalo, New York. That's Peyton Gendron over on the left from Buffalo, New York. The individual over on the right, his name is Brenton Tarrant. He's the mass shooter who in 2019 went into the 2 mosques in Christchurch, New Zealand, and murdered 53 of the worshiping Muslims in those 2 mosques. Now, what you're going to see here is that Peyton Gendron admired, and this is a trend that we're seeing where these extremists are admiring other mass murdering white supremacists all throughout the world, and then they try to emulate what they were doing. And that was the case here between Buffalo and Christchurch, New Zealand. In fact, he emulated him so much so that the manifestos, a trend we see as well, is that they're posting manifestos shortly before going on their killing sprees. In these two cases, Gendron on the left, his manifesto was 60% taken word for word from the guy in New Zealand over on the right, took it just basically out of his great replacement and moved it into his own manifesto, posting it online. And one of the key themes that we see in a lot of the same kinds of manifestos is this notion of the great replacement. It's a concept that's embraced by white supremacists, both here in the United States and abroad, and in Europe and Australia, New Zealand. In America here, though, they believe that white Americans are going to be replaced by immigrants, non-white immigrants. And this is the belief that the white race is going to go extinct that you heard me talk about earlier because of the change in these demographics, this rising tide of color, if you will, all because of the Jews causing this to happen. And it's in an effort to try and implement a white genocide. All this does is animates white supremacists who feel that extreme violence is really the only course of action left to take. Something has to be done now or the white race will be gone for good. Now, this lie has inspired several horrific acts of mass violence against people, whether it's Pittsburgh, Poway, El Paso, Christchurch, New Zealand, and now Buffalo that we saw most recently. And what has become increasingly problematic is that this idea, this great replacement theory, is no longer a theory that remains on the fringes. It's not only in the extremist circles and the dark corners of the internet, it's become popular in mainstream discussions from, like I said, politicians, news pundits, where it may not be always explicitly racist or anti-Semitic like you would find here in these manifestos, but it continues to underscore this nagging notion that something's being taken away from white people in this country and about the perception that they have about where their country is and what's going to happen to it. And this is their course of action. Now, unfortunately, the similarities here didn't end with just him posting a similar manifesto. And this is not an exclusive case where we haven't seen this elsewhere. We see this constantly with a lot of these things happening, which is why it's an unfortunate trend. But the same thing also trying to emulate the shooters in how they carry out their acts. This right here, what you see is actually the shooter in New Zealand. This is his flak vest. The symbol on the front there is what's called the Sonnenrad or sun wheel. It's a white supremacist symbol. And Brenton Tarrant in Christchurch also live streamed the murdering of all those worshiping Muslims. That's what he posted up online. Peyton Gendron, before going into the Buffalo supermarket, he's wearing the same Sonnenrad on his flak vest. He live streamed the murders that he had perpetrated there at the top supermarket. In New Zealand, the shooter actually took all of his long guns, his black long guns, and he had writings of white supremacist symbols on there, names of white supremacist mass murderers like Anders Breivik and others, put the names of individuals that were supposedly victims of black and white crime. A whole bunch of white supremacist stuff was on his guns in New Zealand. The Buffalo shooter did the same thing, posted similar symbols using the same kind of white paint on his black guns, posting the names of white supremacist mass murderers, including Brenton Tarrant, the guy in New Zealand. So unfortunately, when we see these mass murders, what white supremacists have also been tending to doing is just trying to put these individuals in trying to canonize them, if you will, labeling them as saints and heroes. And what we'll end up seeing then online is frequently posting memes and images of these mass murderers, whether it's Dylan Roof in Charleston, South Carolina, in some kind of angelic picture with wings, or the guy in Christchurch, New Zealand with his halo. This is actually Anders Breivik with a halo right there. This is the shooter in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. It says, do something even if it means sacrificing everything, taking a little plug out of the Nike Just Do It ad campaign. It was less than 24 hours after Peyton Gendron went on his killing spree in Buffalo that they posted Saint Peyton Gendron all over the internet and his day of action when he murdered those 10 individuals, injuring 3 more, giving basically his bio sheet, his stats, and his day of action from that one incident alone. And it's obviously disgusting, but this is where they're encouraging other individuals to go out and do these other acts, not necessarily thinking they're going to cause the collapse of society, which is what they're hoping for, but at least maybe it'll start the ball rolling, if you will. Okay, so moving on, another trend that we've noticed, white supremacist propaganda in this country has continuously been a problem, but it's a continuously growing problem as well. One of those data sets that I talked about that we put in our heat map is white supremacist propaganda, mainly because they target so many people within the minority and religious communities with their hate. And so the hate map is going to provide this visual representation of the propaganda efforts by the geographic location. And you can see trends that might end up being might happen. Like I said before, when you see the size of the circle, that indicates the larger the size, the more incidents of propaganda in this case that have taken place. As you can see there is a lot more that takes place in the larger, more urban areas, and you see them in the cities, whether it's Chicago, New York, Philadelphia, Dallas, Los Angeles, and so on, but they're basically spread all throughout the country. Now you can look at the country here, and there were at least nearly 10,000 incidents between 2001 and 2022, and I pretty much am sure that in the next month, by the end of this month, when we have all the numbers compiled, it will have exceeded the 10,000 range with that number. But then if you even just look at Illinois, and you can see where the focus of the propaganda tends to be in those larger areas, larger populated areas, 235 instances that we recorded. Now, something to note, when we put this information in this data set into the heat map itself, when we have an incident and we mark it down as an incident, we don't mark down, let's say a neighborhood was hit with 300 flyers, propaganda flyers, white supremacist stuff. We don't mark that as 300. 300 people in that neighborhood ended up getting it. That is marked down as one single incident. And so you can get an idea about obviously of how much broader and how much more expansive this distribution might very well be, because we can count that one incident, even though it may have had hundreds, if not maybe even thousands of actual flyers being distributed. In addition to seeing where they took place though, and I don't have it here on the slide, but when you go into the heat map, you can also, when you click on the incident itself, it'll show you the date that it happened, the location that it happened, and then a description about the group that is behind that piece of propaganda, as well as examples of that propaganda. Because what you're about to see is that the propaganda itself does not look like the stuff you may have seen 20, 30 years ago. If you saw the stuff, the Klan was notorious for doing the flyer distributions and stuff. And it was always blatant in your face, robed Klansmen, burning cross, save the land, join the Klan kind of stuff. It was blatant. Now, white supremacist propaganda is much more subtle. And what we see here is that it's escalating from the ethereal world of the internet. Now it shows that the individuals are more into doing real world activity. They get their extremist message out, they garner the attention of the media and the public, and they also have the opportunity to attract and recruit new individuals into their movement itself. What propaganda does though is it gives white supremacists the ability to maximize their media and online attention while minimizing the risk of individual exposure and negative media attention and arrests possibly that might come with some more public events that they might engage in. And this barrage of propaganda, which overwhelmingly features this veiled white supremacist language with a pseudo-patriotic slant, as you're going to see here, is a way for them to try and normalize their white supremacist message and bolster the recruitment efforts, because they're targeting minority groups, including Jews and Blacks and Muslims and LGBT community, you name it. Anybody who is their target will be in their propaganda. So by using propaganda to spread their hate though, a small number of people who do this can have an outsized impact, giving the appearance of larger numbers and affecting the entire community. What you'll see then is that it'll take basically one of four forms. It'll either be stickers that are posted throughout the community, like on telephone poles or electrical boxes or streetlight boxes on the back of street signs, flyers that are wheat pasted into subway and bus stations and elsewhere throughout the community, banners that they would actually have either professionally made or even spray paint themselves that they would hang down over overpasses on the interstate, or then the more recent one is spray painting and graffiti, doing stenciled graffiti spray paint work throughout the community as well. And what we see is they're going to try and capitalize on current social issues. So if it's something like this, this is the New Jersey European American Heritage Association, capitalizing on Ashley Babbitt, the woman who was killed during the January 6th insurrection, right there. Nothing in here says anything about white supremacy, talking about her being a patriot. When you do the QR code and you take a look at where it takes you to the white supremacist site. Capitalizing on the coronavirus. It's not the coronavirus that's the real problem, according to them. It's open borders is the virus. Now, you will have plenty that will be blatant. A swastika there saying we are everywhere. There's nobody who's going to second guess that. But a simple defend the Second Amendment, again, pseudo-patriotism, reclaim America like you see here. One of the biggest perpetrators, though, that does this is a group that's called the GDL, or the Goyim Defense League. There are three that we're going to be looking at here because they've been active across the country, but also in Illinois specifically. the Goyim Defense League, Patriot Front, and the White Lives Matter movement. And what you'll see here, though, is that when it comes to the Goyim Defense League, it's blatant. It's anti-Semitic, white supremacist group that's out there. It's not veiled at all. And they latch onto a current event, a hot-button social issue, and they put the racist anti-Semitic slant on it. They'll do large-scale neighborhood distributions along with targeted real-world demonstrations at various locations. And on their website and on their various social media platforms, they have PDFs of every single one of their flyers. And they encourage people, print these out, print them out on your home computer, go to your local Staples, print out many copies of them, hand them out, distribute them. And for GDL, their process is the same most of the time. It's basically taking the statement, every single aspect of blank is Jewish. Fill in the blank with anything, whatever is the hot button issue. So every single aspect of the COVID agenda is Jewish. Every aspect of Disney child grooming is Jewish. And then they take images or names of people that they believe are Jewish and associated with whatever that is to try and use as their evidence of saying that this whole whatever is all controlled and manipulated by Jews. And what they'll do is they'll target, sometimes they'll target certain neighborhoods and areas, never going to target necessarily an individual because that would be too direct to obviously draw attention to themselves, but they also want to just get their message out. Patriot Front, though, on the other hand, has a far more subtle approach. So when you look at Patriot Front, pseudo-patriotic, the white supremacist group that they are, capitalizing on those various issues that are going on, whether it's in the community or the larger country, you can see here, they like to advertise that they're active in whatever community they are, and they publicize it. So here recently, they hung a banner in Naperville, Illinois. I'm not familiar with the geography of Illinois, but they wanted to say that this is where they were, put their banner over the interstate. Over here, they're bragging about the fact that they did stenciled graffiti here in Springfield, Illinois, covering up somebody else's piece that was there, whatever it was, whether it was gang graffiti tags or anything of the sort. But Patriot Front also likes to find if a community has any kind of a mural that is a mural in honor of somebody, primarily if it's somebody African American. So if it's Arthur Ashe, if it's Martin Luther King, if it's George Floyd, they will go and spray paint white over the complete mural and then put all of their stenciled graffiti on top of that mural itself to cover it completely up. Here they are as well. This is in Granite City, Illinois, where they did the same thing. They spray painted their huge stenciled graffiti in that area. White Lives Matter was in Illinois here. They're proclaiming that they did a great job today with their banner drop that they did about the Holodomor, which is it was a big famine in Soviet Ukraine, that there's argument as to whether or not it was genocide. And here the same group, White Lives Matter, was posting stickers in central Illinois as well. So as you can see, they're trying to really promote themselves, but also brag about the kind of activities that they're engaging in. And then last but not least, I'm gonna skip this one last section here in the interest of time. Oh, this is one other trend that we've noticed. Now, obviously, spray painting on buildings is criminal. There is obviously criminal, there are criminal prosecutions that can happen as a result of it. Whether or not law enforcement is going to dedicate manpower to go after it, that remains. That some places will and some places won't. So they've come up with this new tactic, though. Instead of putting up flyers and stuff and spray painting, which can get you in legal trouble, they have actually, just within the last couple weeks or maybe a month or so, have resorted, some of these groups, to using laser cubes. And what laser cubes are, these small little laser projecting cubes that are handheld that they connect their phone to, and they will project a laser message on the sides of buildings. And so as you're going to see here, these are some of the examples. Down in Florida, they were doing this on various buildings. So like this one, Kanye is right about the Jews, and they'll keep shining it up there. The same thing over here. If you want a real scare, investigate Jewish power in America. And they keep running these until they think law enforcement is onto them. And as soon as they do it, they just close up their laser cube and they get out of the scene. Now, I'm not a lawyer. I don't know what the laws are. I mean, what kind of law violation would happen here if they project these up onto buildings and stuff? Is there some kind of offense that they can be charged with? I honestly don't know, but this is their latest tactic that a lot of them are doing. The laser cubes are a little bit expensive, though. That's one of the catches there in this. So obviously, that's one of those things that not everybody is necessarily going to do it, but there are groups that are encouraging others to. All right. Last but not least, then, I want to briefly talk to you about the January 6th insurrection and the extremist participation in that event, since so much of the legal proceedings related to that remain ongoing, from more and more arrests that keep occurring. almost 2 years since it actually took place, to plea deals currently going on, to the trials that are going on, sedition trials like the Oath Keepers. And despite of a lot of chatter that was going on during the insurrection and in the hours and the days and the weeks after it was Antifa who was really involved in the storming of the Capitol and stuff, we were monitoring the events leading up to January 6th. On the day of January 6th in real time, we saw a lot of extremist symbols at the Capitol on that very day, so we knew what side of the spectrum that they were on, whether it was extreme right or extreme left wing of those that we saw. And to date, of the more than 948 people who have been arrested, we've been keeping track. So far, 236 of those, which is approximately 25%, have connections to some type of right-wing extremism. And you can see here there are 67 people arrested so far that are QAnon adherents. 73 of them that are Proud Boys. 24 of them were white supremacists. 60 Oath Keepers or some type of militia, 3%ers, and another 12 that were miscellaneous extreme right-wing groups. Like there's a group called Super Happy Fun America, which is based up in Boston, which is an extreme right group. But that's where the extremist nexus comes from of those that were arrested. Now, just for informational purposes, if you're interested, of those 236 that were arrested that had extremist connections, 7 of them were from Illinois. One's an Oath Keeper, one's a 3%er, one's a Proud Boy, and 4 of them are QAnon adherents. And this is also not to say, this, by the way, does not say necessarily those individuals that had multiple affiliations. There were people that were Proud Boys and QAnon adherents. We just basically put them in the category that was what we felt was, based on the evidence that we had, was their biggest ideological adherence, as opposed to maybe they just dabbled in something else. With that said, then I'm just getting up to probably past my time here. Some of the resources, though, please utilize the ADL and the Center on Extremism, obviously our website that's out there, our reports that we put out. We have a hate symbols database where you can identify symbols, whether it's tattoos or numeric codes or acronyms that they use. Our heat map, so you know what kind of extremism we're seeing in your local communities. And then if you ever had questions about what is something, like what's a term, like if you never heard of the Great Replacement theory, because it started to become more and more popular just this past spring, you could access our glossary, which has nearly 1,000 different terms affiliated with extremism, with a brief explanation of what they are and how they're considered extremist. And so on that note, I really blasted through that whole thing there. I apologize if I went too fast for most people's liking, but at this point, I will gladly take questions here. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Give me a second. Let's
see. Chris, can you hear me?
Yes, Michael. Yep.
Okay. Well, we have a little bit of extra time because so far there's only one question posted, and I can get to that in a minute, but I know you had to cut out some. So if you want to take another, I would say, 5-8 minutes, you've got it before we go to the question. And I encourage anybody else who has questions, there's a drop-down question feature on the GoToMeeting block up in the, should be on the right part, upper right part of your screen. So please feel free to post questions. And then finally, if people didn't see the note, I just got a note from our organizer that we have more than 5. I may be in the wrong tab here.
Okay.
Oh, we do have more. Okay, let's go right to questions. It's only showing me one at a time, and I missed the others. Okay. All right, let's go straight to questions. But before I do, the CLE code for everybody is 220112. 220112. The CLE form is under the handout section in the block on the upper right. So make sure you submit that if you're a lawyer in Illinois and want the CLE credit. Okay, question number 1. How can synagogue board of director members best respond to the wave of anti-Semitism?
Oh, wow. That's a really good question. Well, obviously, one of the things I would certainly recommend is always being vigilant. It's something you have to be very careful of, because obviously we've seen what happened down in Hollyville, Texas this past year, that with the rise of anti-Semitism across the entire country, it's not unfortunately going away. It's obviously a problem that's getting worse. And being vigilant, being aware of what to be on the lookout for, we actually have resources at the ADL on how best to protect your institutes, your religious institutions. That is something that definitely should be done. if you haven't already done some, having some kind of an action plan. Really, that's I would say that's got to be the best way to go.
All right, next question. ADL works with law enforcement. How do you monitor law enforcement as to whether extremists enter into and are working in law enforcement?
That's an excellent question, because that is something that we have come across on I'm not going to say a regular basis, but it certainly does enter into our research when we find them. What our course of action has always been is that when we find somebody that is an extremist that is either active duty or maybe not even, they could be retired. In fact, there was a retired law enforcement officer from Idaho who was just at a white supremacist conference this past weekend, participated in it, and it was a surprise to us. But when we find that happening, we immediately will get as much information as we can. We reach out to that law enforcement entity. We let them know the evidence that we have to say that this person is a member of the Oath Keepers, a member of a white supremacist group, or even has that kind of ideology, to show from our end, this is the proof that we have that does say that this person is an extremist. At that point, our hands are tied. We can't do anything about it. So if that police department is going to do something proactive to reprimand or fire that employee, that officer, that's really on them. Sometimes we do have a good reaction from law enforcement. Other times we have them where they're not going to necessarily do anything. At the same time, law enforcement recognizes our work and the work that we do being so effective. We have been reached out also by Internal Affairs Bureau, where they will reach out to us and say, we have an officer, here is the evidence we're concerned about, what do you think? Is this elevated to the level of this person being an extremist? In some cases, they are. In other cases, it's a little questionable. I had an officer not too long ago who had a large Nazi eagle in a police department on his forearm, but it was the large Nazi eagle without the swastika in it. I found out by doing some research, and in addition to having that, he was also a World War II reenactor. However, he was not a reenactor for the American side. He was a reenactor for the SS and Nazi Germany. So putting all these things together, there still was not enough evidence for me to definitively say that he was a white supremacist, but at least we had our concerns to say that this is somebody you want to keep on your radar. And by the way, we do the same for active and retired military too. If we find somebody that's actively involved in the military, we reach out to the next in command and everything to let them know this is what we found.
And I'll point out that if you go to the ADL website, ADL released a recent report of the research that Chris is referring to, where research was done as to members in particular extremist groups and who are on active duty right now. ADL was very careful not to mention the names publicly because the vetting had not been done and that would not be fair. But they turned over the information it had, as Chris said, to the various police departments or governmental agencies so that if they could take the material and do the appropriate vetting to be fair. And sadly, there were some mixed responses. Some government agencies responded promptly, some not so much.
Yeah, that's a very interesting case, because there was about a year and a half ago, there was a massive leak, pardon me, of the membership rolls of the Oath Keepers and 3 Percenters. These were anti-government groups that primarily targeted law enforcement and military to join their ranks. And this massive data leak, we were able to get all this information, and a lot of the analysts within the Center on Extremism spent an unimaginable amount of time culling through every single individual to find out who this person was, what department they worked for, and everything. And Michael, you're absolutely right. We did not release any of the information to the media or even in our report because we didn't want to do that, but we let law enforcement agencies know this person is on the books currently as being an Oath Keeper, or this person was on the books as being an Oath Keeper, and let them do what they wanted to, with, like you said, mixed results, unfortunately.
We had a question, not for Chris, probably more for me, as to whether a recording of this presentation will be shared later. I believe the answer to that is correct, that the FBA records its virtual programs, but I'm going to have to follow up with our administrator to confirm that, and hopefully I'll do that before our program's over. If I don't, please reach out and we'll let you know whether this program will be available later. Okay, next question. A question is, who is preparing the memes that are circulated online? I'm sure, I know it's not a one, but Chris, what can you tell us about that?
The meme subculture, just on its own, not the extremist version of it, is something that has taken off within the last 10 or so years. And it became very popular within the 4chan, 8chan at the time, on those different platforms and stuff, to just kind of spread funny, edgy kind of stuff. Well, far be it for the extremists not to capitalize on something that's popular with the mainstream people that are out there. So they have taken it upon themselves that this has been a recruitment tool to lure younger kids into the movement. In fact, there was an excellent article that was written by an anonymous mother in Washington, D.C. about her 13-year-old son being recruited into the alt-right movement in part because of memes. Memes are a way to make offensive kind of things edgy, pseudo-humorous, but hey, you shouldn't be laughing at that. Okay, so I'm still gonna put it out there. And now you have a young adolescent that goes, oh, that's kind of funny. They start making their own and they start passing them on. It's an easy way to get a message out there, and it has extremist connotations, but you can pretend that it doesn't, because maybe it's a cartoon, or maybe it's something, oh, I was just joking because it was just a meme. But it's an effective way to get it out there. As far as who's doing it, it is everybody, as an opportunity to get your message out there, to recruit, to do whatever it is that you need to. It has become a popular tool, unfortunately.
Any comments on whether Elon Musk's dismantling of Twitter's security defenses will create a fresh breeding ground for extremist efforts?
Absolutely. It is an absolute concern. It's something that we unfortunately have seen, and we initially were concerned what was going to happen if he were to acquire the whole Twitter platform. We have seen that those people that were responsible for the content moderation, who have basically been let go, and then the content moderation not being moderated, that it becomes a free-for-all. It has the potential to not even going back to what it was, but becoming even worse if there isn't going to be that content moderation. And we are seeing a lot of problematic stuff that's being posted and not being taken down, whether it's misinformation, disinformation about COVID, to blatantly anti-Semitic stuff that previously would not have made it on that platform, is up there and not being removed. So absolutely, it is a big concern to us.
Next question. Is the Highland Park, Illinois July 4 shooter considered an extremist? Why or why not? Many of the victims were Jewish and Latino.
Excellent question, because that's one that we do get asked pretty frequently. Obviously, since it's basically in your state, in your backyard. At this point right now, we do not have enough evidence to say that this person was an extremist of any particular type. There was a lot of, immediately following the incident, there was so much misinformation that was going around about this person. Was this person trans? Was this person this? Was this person that? And to date, we have not found enough information to say that they were. I'm not saying that to diminish the people that were the victims, being of Jewish descent, Latino descent, and so on, that they were not targeted for that yet. We do not have that evidence, though, to say that it was. And that's something, when it comes to the extremist-related murder reports too, there are some that we would follow along, and we don't include in the report for the previous year because we still don't have that information. But maybe in the course of the next year, we might find more information that would say, all right, now that's, yeah, I'm sorry, that reaches that level, that threshold. It was an extremist-related murder. Maybe that will be the case with the Highland Park shooting, but at this point, not yet. People asked that also about the Las Vegas shooting as well. People immediately thought that was extremist related, and even to this day, however many years ago that was, we haven't found anything.
We have 1 minute till the end, Chris, so I've got an easy question for you. So given all of this, what can we do to effectively oppose the extremists in our society? I'm sure you can answer that completely and fully in 1 minute.
Oh, absolutely. One, you need to speak out when the extremism is exposed. Don't just let it go thinking that, all right, you know what, I'm not going to say it. You need to basically call it out for what it is. Two, I always tell people, educate yourself, whether it's going onto our website and finding out what does this propaganda look like, so you know to recognize it when you're walking through your community, that you see it on the back of a sign or something like that. That way, again, combating it by exposing it, bringing light to the darkness, that is definitely the way to go. Three, if you have kids, you need to educate your kids, and you need to be aware of what your kids are getting involved in online, especially. All my kids are basically grown, so for those that have the younger kids, getting pulled into that online culture, making sure you're aware of the platforms that are on, whether it's gaming platforms, because that is another way that they're recruiting them through such innocuous places like Roblox, which most kids are playing on Roblox, in certain corners of it, have become recruiting grounds for young kids. So definitely know what your kids are getting into as well.
All right. It is now 1 o'clock on the nose. I want to be prompt in the official end of the program. I want to thank everybody who tuned in for this important program. I want to remind all Illinois lawyers that the code for CLE is 220112. And I'm going to ask Chris. Chris, if you have a few more minutes, there are a few more questions. And
Sure.
Anybody who would like to stay tuned in, if Chris has the time, I'll keep going.
I certainly do. Yep.
Okay. For those who have to sign off, thank you very much for attending. If you practice in federal court and are interested in learning more about the Federal Bar Association, you can certainly call me. You can go to the national website. You can go to the separate Chicago website. Either way, we'd love to talk to you about membership. And thank you again to the Appellate Lawyers Association and the Chicago Bar Association for co-sponsoring and helping promote today's program. All right, with that, I'm going to continue going with a few more questions.
Go for it.
Okay. What is the trend for 2023?
Oh, that's if I had my crystal ball and I could tell what the next trend was going to be. If I could tell you that, I would probably be a millionaire. I'd write a book and basically make $1 million off of it. But I really think we have to be keeping close tabs on the political races as they're going to be moving on. Those that obviously that one that had extremist connections, we see that obviously becoming a hotbed of activity. So extremists in politics of all different types, whether it be at the school board level, going all the way up to Senate or however far you want to go. So extremists in politics. And I honestly still think though that social media platforms, especially because what is happening now with Twitter, which was mainstream and then they booted a lot of people off and then things seem to be going okay for a while. Now it's going in a different direction. I think that's going to be a very big issue. And I think anti-Semitism is, with what we're seeing going on with various people like Nick Fuentes and Kanye West or Ye or whatever he is, and Ye in particular having such a presence, not only online, but obviously as a personality that has a lot of attention drawn on him, saying stuff anti-Semitic like that can have a huge impact on whether it's other people that are going to get involved or have the same kind of ideology. That I think is going to be really problematic because it's only going to snowball at this point. He's not backtracking anything.
As a compliment to you, I'll tell you that the great majority of our attendees today have remained online.
Oh, wow. Thank you.
All right. Let's see here. Same question. Does the opposition to teaching critical race theory fit into the category of extremist groups?
Not really, no. In fact, from my personal experience, I think a lot of what it is just people who are opposed to it. They're not elevated to the level of extremists. They're just, many of them are ignorant of what critical race theory really is, and that they're automatically going to conflate if something is taught to their fifth grade child about inclusion or something, whatever it might be, that's critical race theory. And that just shows that they don't know what that means. That they're also conflating it with saying that you should have all these different pronouns and stuff, and that's part of critical race theory, which has nothing to do with anything. So no, we don't consider that extremist yet. There are plenty of extremists that will complain about critical race theory, but those in general, no, it's not considered extremist.
I'm sorry, this program, the way it shows the questions to me is hard to read sometimes. Here we go. This week, a jury found Oath Keepers founder Stuart Rhodes guilty of seditious conspiracy. In ADL's experience, do major anti-extremist court rulings like this one deter extremist activity, or cause further radicalization?
Oh, that's actually a really good question. To be honest, I could not speak to any kind of expertise as to what direction it goes. What I will say is just from experience, when big events like this do happen, obviously right after January 6th, immediately following that, there were a lot of extremists that were encouraging people that this was the thing to do. This is what we need to keep on doing. This is what's going to make things happen in this country. Then as the arrests started happening, that's when people started saying, whoa, 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 maybe not. Let's not promote this. We saw the same thing happen in Charlottesville, Virginia, at the Unite the Right rally. Everybody was saying, the white supremacists and the right-wing extremists were saying, let's all gather in Charlottesville, Virginia for this massive rally, and we want to make our voices heard, make our point known. And then what ended up happening was people got arrested, people got charged, and people also started getting doxxed online. And initially there was a wave of people getting involved in the movement, but they immediately started to backtrack because they realized there were repercussions for being exposed, for getting arrested, for that kind of stuff. So it really could go either way. I certainly would suspect it's going to embolden some people to want to go and join groups like the Oath Keepers, because they're probably thinking, look, that was a big government taking over, basically barreling through that case and winning it on their own when they really shouldn't have. The Oath Keepers were right. They had every right to do what they did. And so that will embolden some memberships, but I couldn't give you any kind of a firm number. Like, are we going to see massive amounts? Are we going to see a lot of pushback? I don't know.
All right, this next one you perhaps can speak to, and if I can add to. The question is, what changes in the law is the ADL advocating to address extremism?
Hang on one second. My dog is barking there. I got to close the door. I'm sorry. Could you read that again, Michael? What changes in
the law does ADL advocate for to address extremism?
I honestly could not answer that, because that would be part of our grace team. I don't know what changes specifically that they would advocate for. So I don't want to give misinformation on that one. So I'm going to have to step back.
And turn it over to me, because I'm a member of ADL's grace team.
There you go.
Advocacy Corps, and I regularly lobby for ADL, Congress, and state legislatures. The two immediate ones that come to mind is there is federal and state programs to provide to houses of worship, community organizations, community centers to increase security, camera systems, alarm systems, training, and there had been federal money allocated for that in the past. It's always insufficient, and ADL has been advocating for an increase in the amount of direct monetary assistance to allow various community organizations and houses of worship pay for increased security. That doesn't get rid of extremism, but perhaps makes community members safer. And then second, there has been not great responses from local law enforcement in reporting hate crimes. There are many parts of the country where, if you look at their stats, they don't have any hate crimes. And we know that that's just not true. It's that the law enforcement agencies are not reporting it. So there is additional funding programs to help local law enforcement have the ability to classify and track hate crimes and report it up into national databases and national reporting systems. Those are two that come to mind. There may be more.
Thank you, Michael. Appreciate that.
Okay. Next, does ADL have programs for the reprogramming or recovery of individuals formerly associated with such groups?
Unfortunately, we don't. That is a question I get asked quite frequently about, especially because one of my expertises is white supremacist prison gangs. Do we have something to try and help people get out of those movements, those groups and stuff, so that when they're released from prison, they're not even more radicalized? But we do not have any kind of programs like that. There are several that are out there that we obviously recommend, whether it's Life After Hate is one of them. I'm trying to think of, there's another one for kids that might get involved. The parents, you have to remember the parents organization to try and get their children out if they see that they're starting to become more radicalized as well. But we ourselves do not have anything to get them out of the movement if they already are. We do have programs like our World of Difference Institute programs and confronting anti-Semitism programs and our No Place for Hate schools, which is helping at the school level so kids understand and are more compassionate and stuff. But as far as those that are already in the movement, helping them get out, we do not.
And Chris, I want to be mindful of your time too. We're now 10 minutes after 70 people have hung on, so that's wonderful. Should we wrap it up now?
That works for me. Sure.
All right. Well, I want to thank everybody who hung on after the official end. It's a terribly important program and set of information. As I mentioned before, anyone should feel free to reach out to me if you want pathways to additional information. Much of that is on the ADL's website, and anything that's more particular, I can reach out to my colleagues and friends at the ADL, for particular answers. So thank you everybody for coming. And with that, I want to thank our speaker, and it's time to end the program. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Michael. Great to be on.